YouTube is technically the most visited website of all time, and it's pretty easy to see why. It's old, so you can basically never run out of stuff to watch. Its primary content format is videos, which are the easiest type of format to consume, and most importantly because it strikes a unique balance of education and entertainment in the same platform. You wanna learn something new? You check YouTube. You get tired and want to rest your brain for a bit? You stay on YouTube. It really is the one-stop shop of the internet, which is doubly important for Tekken since the devs have built up a reputation of being terrible at implementing tutorials and guides to learn the game, ultimately leaving the job of teaching the newcomers to the content creators. And whether you stumble upon funny Swedish man or interesting Asian American guy, you're in good hands for the most part. But let's say you want more. You want to delve deeper into the Tekken content rabbit hole, and you find more and more YouTubers like seemingly dysfunctional European couple
You're sleeping on a couch, I don't fucking care. You're sleeping on a fucking couch.
or situational and obscure tech-focused content creators, and you dig deeper towards the under 1k subchannels who do stuff like arcade mode playthroughs, and you go deeper until you... Oh my. Maybe I dug too deep. Let's go back a step, shall we? Well, maybe just a little wouldn't hurt, would it? Going back to this model, you could argue that it is a pretty accurate visualization of the Tekken content sphere, with little to no interaction between the different layers, and that's how it's been for a long time. But lately, things have been changing in a weird, convoluted way, and the biggest catalyst of this change has been none other than Tekken 8. Let me explain. As of now, there are two big kinds of problems that are plaguing the game. The first of which is unintentional mistakes. Things like the initial bad balance, game-breaking bugs, and short-sighted ranked parameters. The other kind of problems are intentional decisions, like reusing assets from past games and passing them off as content made for that entry even though we already had them in the previous game, or ignoring blatant cheating practices that have been ruining the experience for a large amount of players, and the intentional DLC character balance decisions for it to do well at launch. Now, for the unintentional mistakes, they may seem like big problems at first, but if you've been around for a long time, you'd know that this is just standard procedure. There has never been a Tekken game that has been well balanced and bug-free on release. In fact, it has become a 20-year-long tradition to wait for a patched version sometime after the game's initial release, and Tekken 8 is no exception to this. Again, this is just standard procedure, so I don't worry about it too much, and neither should you. What we should worry about is the second cluster of problems, since it is composed of well thought out and intentional decisions, and if the community doesn't voice out its frustration for these problems, they will persist and negatively impact the series. A very relevant example of this is the cheating problem. If the Tekken team does nothing to stop the many instances of cheating in the game, such as the notorious auto low block throw break whiff punish macro full combo 5 course 2 Michelin star meal script, people are going to acknowledge that they won't do anything about it. They'll start using the scripts themselves, hurting more and more people's experience with the game and lowering the player count, meaning there will be less people to sell the microtransactions to, which will ultimately lead to the game's untimely demise. If you think I'm exaggerating, here are the sales over time for Tekken compared to Street Fighter and MK. And if you still think I'm exaggerating, here are the sales growth numbers for T8 compared to T7. If these circumstances persist, it could, in the worst case scenario, lead to the discontinuation of support for the game, and I'm only being slightly dramatic here. You would think that, with Tekken 8 driving itself off this waterfall, that the community would speak up about it. Community that should be spearheaded by its prominent members, i.e. the biggest channels, but they simply don't most of the time. And even on the rare occasions where they do speak up about Tekken 8's problems, it's only when the problem is trending, for lack of a better word. And even if said problem isn't fixed, as long as it's out of the limelight, it never gets brought up again. Now, it's unclear whether they don't want to get on the BAM Cops' bad side, or they just think that negative and critical content is bad for long-term engagement, but that's just the way it is. And it may look like it's a bad thing, but I don't think that's the case, and I'll tell you why later. But for now, the problems persist, and there is no one to provide a platform for the people to voice their frustrations concerning the game. Or is there? The people that I'm about to introduce actually inspired me with their actions to make this video. And as for who they are, you could see them as critique crusaders. In other words, they are small to medium-sized content creators who took to YouTube and vented their frustrations. Some with the microtransactions, others with the cheating and lack of communication, and a few with the overarching design philosophy. Granted, they each have a fairly small following, but when they congregate together, they can make a difference. If they get more and more engagement, we could get an answer, or maybe even better, some changes. It may seem like the big picture here is small YouTuber good, big YouTuber bad, or that the latter should also start focusing on the bad things in the game, but that's not necessarily the case, and in order to see that, we would have to take the stance of a Tekken newbie while following a few scenarios. And let's say we wanted to see what the Tekken YouTube sphere has to offer. For scenario A, in which the big creators were to regularly bring up the game's inadequacies alongside the critique crusaders doing their thing, you can imagine the idea that would be painted in the newcomer's head about the game. It would all come crashing down, with no one else buying the game and anyone with under 2 hours of playtime refunding it, with the financial future of the game in jeopardy, and since for the publishers this is all really just a numbers game for them, the slope on which the devs would have to push the boulder of positive changes for the game becomes steeper and steeper until it is no longer possible to save the game.
You lose.
On to scenario B, in which the large channels continue pumping out regular content for the game, and the critique crusaders, with no one to heed their messages, simply disappear into the void. Tekken continues to go down this corporate ravine of catering to newcomers concerning balanced directions and shoving reused assets for the price of a full game on top of a full game, while still ignoring the glaring problems that persist. The core audience, the one that had always been there and ready to support the game up until that point, simply gives up and leaves to search for a place where they are treated better. The player count dwindles as the diehard fans are gone, and even the casual player base to whom the game pandered so much will still leave because that's what most casuals do. The game dies a slow and painful death. Again. For scenario C, which is just the actual situation we have right now, the newcomer first comes into contact with the educational and entertainment focused content while they warm up to the game. And it is only after a bit of digging that they find the content that discusses the game's problems. By then, it's a coin toss on whether they agree with the message or they prefer the game's current state. But at least, the player is now here to stay. Using the information and conjectures mentioned during the video, it would be possible to draw a model similar to the one that's being made right now, where a balance is struck between game-promoting content like tutorials and entertainment, and constructive criticism like cheater callouts and low-effort game content. And keep in mind that while this is my view on the Tekken content ecosystem, it is neither what I would want it to ideally look like, nor am I trying to pass it off as the objective truth. Which leads us to the end of this video. If you have any different opinions about all of this, you can always shove them right up your ass. You can always share them in the comments below. In the meanwhile, never stop analyzing the Tekken YouTube landscape, and see you next time.